It is my honor to introduce our founder and president of NCPHT and LFF, Mrs. Donna Edwards. Mrs. Edwards served as First Lady of Louisiana from 2016 to 2024. She's dedicated decades of leadership and advocacy to protecting vulnerable populations and advancing coordinated responses to human trafficking. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mrs. Donna Edwards for opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to some of you. Thank you, Dana, and thank you all for being here today. We know that everyone has busy schedules, but your virtual presence here today is another sign of your commitment to protecting lives and preventing exploitation. This work is deeply personal to me, and the number of victims being caught up in the crime of human trafficking is growing exponentially. Over 50 million victims worldwide and 1.1 million in the United States. And those numbers may be even higher, probably so. 1.1 million, that's like filling up the New Orleans Superdome 13 times over. And it holds 83,000 on concerts. That's just unbelievable, that number. What we do know is that behind every statistic we discuss today, it is real. There's a real human being, a real person, someone's child, sister, brother, someone who deserves safety, dignity, and protection. And this is why today's discussion on prevention and prosecution matters. And I'd like to offer a special heartfelt thank you to First Lady Brittany Bashir for her unwavering commitment to combating human trafficking. We are deeply grateful for her willingness to use her voice, her platform, and influence to protect vulnerable individuals and to strengthen coordinated responses to this crime. I want to also extend my sincere thanks in advance to our distinguished speakers who have agreed to share their expertise, experiences, and leadership with us today. Thank you. You can each bring a unique perspective from policy, prosecution, law enforcement, and survivor-centered response that strengthens this conversation. So we are truly grateful for your partnership. Like many of you already know, January is Human Trafficking Prevention Month, but exploitation does not end with the month. It goes on. Human trafficking happens every day in every community. Prevention is not seasonal. It requires ongoing awareness, education, and action. We all know that victims of human trafficking endure severe physical, emotional, and psychological trauma. Many are controlled through fear, manipulation, debt, threats, false promises of safety, love, and opportunity. Survivors often share that the most painful part was not only the abuse, but feeling invisible or unheard when they tried to seek help. We also know that large-scale sporting events create conditions traffickers may exploit due to increased travel and crowds and high demand for temporary labor and services. These events do not cause trafficking, but they can intensify exploitation without proactive prevention efforts. Law enforcement officers and prosecutors are essential partners in combating human trafficking. These cases are complex and require trauma-informed investigations. Less than 5% of human trafficking cases result in prosecution, underscoring the need for stronger collaboration and survivor-centered approaches. Evidence is greater and difficult to gather, and cases sometimes take time, and trauma can impact victim participation. Victims become fearful, distrust systems, and not identify themselves as victims. So preventing and responding to human trafficking requires all of us, law enforcement and prosecutors, educators and healthcare professionals, business, hospitality workers, and event staff, parents, students, community members. But when we all work together, traffickers lose power. Collaboration helps us identify victims sooner and support survivors more effectively and strengthen prosecutions. So again, as I often say, we all have a role to play. So let us all continue to work together, each chipping away at this iceberg one piece at a time, and together we will make great impact to end this scourge against humanity. So it's now my distinct honor to introduce First Lady Brittany Bashir, who has been both an advisory board member of NCPHST and a dear friend. I am incredibly proud of her unwavering commitment to addressing human trafficking. The work that she and her husband, Governor Andy Beshear, have done in eradicating trafficking in Kentucky and to promote better outcomes for foster care youth is truly inspiring. So please join me in welcoming First Lady Brittany Beshear.
Thank you so much, Donna. I miss seeing your face, so it's great to see you here
Me
today.
too.
Um, and Dana, thank you for all of your work. Between you and Donna, I am just so honored and privileged to be a part of this coalition. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak here this afternoon. I'm glad we're all here because, as Donna and Dana have both pointed out, we have really important issues in the realm of trafficking that we need to discuss. We all know the statistics. Across the United States and around the globe, more than 27 million men, women, and children are victims of human trafficking. It tears families apart and it leaves victims not knowing where to turn or whom they can trust. My personal faith teaches me that we are called to protect the most vulnerable. One of my top priorities as Kentucky's First Lady is helping end human trafficking in every awful form that it takes. I am so proud to serve on the advisory board for the National Coalition for the Prevention of Human Sex Trafficking. Through this board, I've seen that knowledge is power. The more we understand trafficking, the more action we can take to help our neighbors. It takes all of us working together to raise awareness about these crimes and educating ourselves on how to recognize the signs and to take action. I want to highlight some work being done in my state to support victims of human trafficking and to hold offenders accountable. My husband, Andy, created the Office of Child Abuse and Human Trafficking Prevention and Prosecution, where a historic level of child predators were arrested during his term as Attorney General. He also created the Survivors Council, which provided a way for survivors of violent crime to have a voice in their government. Because one of the things that we have learned is that the survivors of human trafficking and similar crimes have the best understanding and the most knowledge to help us be better in figuring out how to tackle this problem. We announced the Upstream Academy with Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky. This program will train at least one person from each county to identify and prevent child abuse, and then that person can turn around and train at least 50 more people. We know how important it is for people to be trained to recognize when a family, a victim, a trafficked victim is in need. Andy has awarded millions of dollars in funding to provide survivors services, including through the Violence Against Women Act and the Victims of Crime Act. And the Kentucky State Police have worked to provide parents free resources on internet safety. Since 2019, in total, over 470 online predators have been arrested by KSP for crimes against Kentucky's children. I'm proud that we have Max Gossman, a prosecutor in Kentucky's Special Victims Unit, joining this virtual event today to talk more about this great work. This is work Andy and I are committed to building on. In fact, this May, the Commonwealth will work with the National Coalition for the Prevention of Human Sex Trafficking to launch a statewide anti-trafficking awareness campaign ahead of the Kentucky Derby. Sadly, as Donna mentioned, we know large celebrations and events can be a hotspot for human trafficking. So we want to make sure everyone who attends these events can recognize the signs of trafficking and knows how to report it. Trafficking is an issue that can feel overwhelming, but when we work together and learn together, we know we can make a difference. We can make sure everyone in our communities is educated about the warning signs. If we see something, we have to say something. And together we can stop the stigma and remind people it's okay to ask for help. It's always better to be overly cautious when a situation seems off. And I want to say to any survivors out there who might be listening, we want you to know there is help. You are brave, and we're here to support you. Thank you to everyone. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dana. Thank you so much.
Wow. Beautiful, beautiful remarks. Thank you so much, First Lady Beshear and Mrs. Edwards, to both of you for grounding us in the human impact and in the urgency of this issue. We're just so thankful for your leadership. And so at this time, you all will turn to the critical role of law enforcement and prosecution in identifying trafficking, conducting trauma-informed investigations, and pursuing accountability, which we know can be quite the challenge. It is my privilege to introduce Mr. Kevin Highland. He has graced us with his presence and expertise before, and we wanted to bring him back again for a little longer time to speak and share information on the challenges and what's involved in investigating these cases and getting some of these bad actors off the streets. Mr. Highland is the former UK anti-slavery commissioner and a globally recognized leader in anti-trafficking enforcement and policy. His work has shaped international approaches to prevention, victim protection, and offender accountability. Today, he will share insights from a law enforcement perspective, including these challenges that I mentioned in investigations and strategies to strengthen outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kevin Highland. Kevin?
Thank you so much, Dana, and thank you to Donna for keeping this work going, and for the First Lady of Kentucky for that very apt introduction, very much talking about the struggling and the suffering of the victims. I'm going to talk about this now in a sense, as you say, Dana, in a law enforcement perspective, but looking at it from the needs of the victims and survivors, and specifically looking at how we can build trust once those people come forward into the criminal justice system or into the system as to be known by the state. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you now, if I can. If you can give me permission, Dana. Thank you. So I'm going to start by doing it with explaining a real case. And the many cases that I dealt with, and subsequently as commissioner looking at victims' needs, came from many parts of the world. But I was based in London and ran and headed up the UK human trafficking efforts. But that took me all over the world, because victims who were arriving in the UK came from all over the world. But of course, in the UK, the highest number of people trafficked are British nationals. So it's not something that just happens to people who are migrants. It happens to our own domestic nationals as well. And the measures required, similar, other than, of course, people who don't understand the system need better explanation. So I'll just play this for you for a second. So every victim that came into contact with my police forces or with the statutory agencies, particularly in London, but across the UK, that was the minimum standards. Those things had to be given, and they are now written into law in the UK, that people have to have the right to those things. But writing it down is one thing, delivering it is another. And that meant that we had to work with different agencies. And that involved many faith groups, working with faith groups. And in particular in London, we started to work a lot with Christian organizations, but also the Jewish community, Muslim organizations, who were helping and reaching out to us to provide us with resources when we would identify victims, which was a very different approach. But within that, we had to come up with some standards that everybody understood. And there's an expression in policing and criminal investigations that we use called the golden hour. It's not necessarily an hour, but it's something you work to. Whenever you come across a serious crime, the first steps that you take can set the agenda for the rest of that crime. So how you treat the victim, or how you treat the crime scene, or how you deal with looking for other perpetrators or the perpetrator will change the way that crime is investigated. So I introduced what's called decision logs. So decision logs are developed right at the beginning. And victim care is a part of a decision which the police will be involved in, but also many other agencies. And then safeguarding issues, not just to the current victim, but are there other victims that need to be identified? Then looking at crime scenes. And those of us who work in law enforcement or work in justice, a victim is sometimes a very important crime scene. But how you deal with that victim, because you may need to take evidence from that victim, clothing, their phone, what's in their head, DNA samples, all sorts of things that may be attached to the victim have to be dealt with very sensitive. And then securing evidence, because if you don't get it at one point, it could be lost forever. Setting a plan, working out what expertise are needed, looking at your domestic and your international aspects, and understanding the victims. We heard the First Lady talking about that. And of course, what they know and what they've experienced is crucial. But all these things have to be made very quickly, these decisions, certainly within a few hours, and it will develop over a day or so. But sometimes you may only have an hour or two or three or four to make all these decisions because you've got a high risk case in front of you. So the method of reporting, how do people report? And of course, there's many different ways, but you need to build up policies and strategies and ways that people understand. And of course, volunteers, non-government organizations, charities, crucial to this fight. Then there's intelligence that we will gather as policing, and not just the intelligence that's targeted at trafficking, but intelligence that's targeted at organized crime. So when other parts of law enforcement are looking at, say, gun running, drugs, or even terrorism, those departments have previously provided me with intelligence that they picked up, and then they passed it on for my departments to deal with. So making sure you're at that high level of intelligence gathering within the intelligence systems. And that can often be related to health service and to other agencies. Then, of course, direct reporting, being able to make reports online, and then through the health service and many other statutory agencies like children's services. In the UK, it's a legal requirement of all of those agencies like health, immigration, police, and education to comply with me or to work with me when I was the commissioner and to bring in reporting processes. As I've said, the golden hour is crucial. And in the golden hour, it will be about gathering evidence. It will be about seizing phones and starting to get data off of phones, particularly the victim's phone. And that may be the only phone you have at that time. Or if there's a scene, there may be phones there. And of course, where is the money? Start to look at the money early on. And when I say look at the money, we're not only talking about the proceeds of the crime, so the money that's been generated by the criminals that they're doing this for, but what is the money that's been invested? So if there is a premises that's been used as a brothel, who is paying for that premises? Who is paying the rent? Who is paying for the electricity? Has there been taxis going there? Who are paying for those taxis? All that is now much more easily available than it used to be. And all that can start to build you a picture, again, people say, well, this will take weeks. Generally speaking, when we had a case come in, and we would have many, many cases running, most of this would be done within 2 or 3 hours, certainly on the high risk ones. And then, of course, looking at routes of travel. Was it train? Was it coach? Was it air? Was it by car? And if you get a car registration number, is there places where you can log that? Is there petrol stations? Is there petrol stations there that would have CCTV because people went in there? If they were on an aeroplane, there's definitely going to be CCTV, but also you can't book a plane now without a credit card. And then you can start to build a very big picture of somebody's activity. But one of the most important things is how you deal with the victim. And I have been fortunate enough to have visited New Orleans and seen the Eden Project and seen such a high standard of example of how a victim should be received having gone to a hospital. But this is a process now that's being developed across the UK, which is looking purely at sexual abuse or people who have suffered significant harm. And so the vast majority of traffic victims, or a number of them, would engage with these services. But I just want you to have a look at this for a minute, because this is now part of the government strategy around funding safe places for victims of sexual violence and associated crime.
The universal view is it's a really impressive facility. We've met the staff who are going to be working here with their expertise. They are delighted to be able to have such an incredible facility. It's been designed with the service user, the complainant in mind, to take them through their journey from when they first arrive here after what would have been an incredibly traumatic experience, to care for them, gather that forensic evidence, and then hopefully bring them to a point where they can see a way forward and be supported. But the staff are impressed. I think everyone who's toured the facility today can see what a brilliant building it is, how it's designed expressly for its purpose. And I hope that anyone that works here or has the unfortunate situation of having to come and be a complainant here will really appreciate the care and the expertise that's available to them. The brilliant thing is it's been excellent collaboration. We've managed to bring it in on budget, and I think for a state-of-the-art facility that really recognises the complainant's needs first and foremost, it's a really excellent piece of work, and I hope future-proofed for our needs for many years to come.
What we've got now is a situation where we have the staff in place, the specialists are in place. We have a separate facility away from the SARC at the moment that we've been using for a number of years, which is at forensic standard. It just hasn't got all the rest of the wraparound with it. The support services, the comfortable seats, the waiting area. We haven't got that at the current facility. The current facility, I have to say, is up to standard, and so are the staff and the service that they get. But that's with police referral, police chaperone at the moment. Moving forward, I mean, obviously the SARC isn't up and running at the moment in its full capacity, but we will be able to, hopefully by the end of the year, use the facility, and the police can use it as well as the staff here for self or police referrals.
The reason why I show that is because I have actually used those services. We had them in London some time ago, and the confidence it builds with a victim is immeasurable. And what they also have in there that they didn't go into the detail is they have facilities there, so the victim will never ever have to go to court. If the victim has to go to court, they will give their evidence from that facility. They have the medical examination there. They have the police statement taken there. So they never have to go to a police station, a hospital, unless they're badly injured, or a courtroom. And they feel comfortable there. I know that your constitution may have problems with that process, but that is the facility that we have around, keeping the victims away from having to stand in the courtroom. But just to give you an investigation of a real case and how it can work, following the methodology I just said, a victim came forward and walked into a London police station, and this is a true case. And from what she said, specialist officers were assigned to the case within a very short period of time, within 15, 20 minutes of her initially reporting. They then started the process of taking her to a comfort suite and taking her account. And within a short while, her phone was in the possession of police, and she had some paper on her that showed the address that she was being held at, where she was being raped and sold in prostitution every day for a couple of months. But then looking at her phone and looking at things like she had a local travel card for the local tube stations, the subway, that then identified who had paid for that, which then could show who had paid for her airline ticket into the country. Looking at that then, also the same people were paying for other properties, and that connected up to multiple properties all over the United Kingdom. So suddenly this went from one case of a person reporting into a police station to a nationwide, right up to Scotland, with mobile phones, with houses, and of course then with money, and lots of money. And the case just built and built and built. And there was so much data, and all of this was gathered within 24 hours by using technology. And so what did that lead to? Well, this woman was a foreign national from Eastern Europe, and all of a sudden this case is getting larger and larger and larger. So we're going to liaise with the foreign organizations, but we knew where they were coming from because of the flights and because of the different routes that were taken, and of course from her own account. So that then led to more and more victims being identified. And so that meant that there were more resources needed in different areas of the UK to start doing operations to release these women from their exploiters. And this is all now happening within 48 hours. And then all of this is building up. More flights are identified, more people, more properties, more phones. And then we look to take the investigation overseas. So with the help of Interpol, Europol, and other agencies, we then start to look at what was happening abroad. So we find that the money has gone to Poland and to the Czech Republic, and there was also money going to Romania. That could be seen through money transfers. And so as we started to look at that and then identified a fourth country, Slovakia, then we started to look at where the flights were coming from, and we started to identify a list of victims, and the case developed. And then we looked at where was the main sums of money going, and that was to India. So all of this intelligence then led to what was going to be a difficult case, but evidentially a very sure case. And the trial went, and there was ultimately 17 people who were brought to the UK on different arrest warrants. And they all stood trial, and every single one of them were convicted, all receiving around 14 years imprisonment. And the money that was taken, we then went to India and recovered all that money. And the reason I say that is when I was in the US recently, or last year, I was looking at cases with certain attorney generals and identified that some of the cases that were happening in the US were connected to systems like this once you started to look at the money. So intelligence sharing is crucial. Then when you come to the trial, planning the trial itself is crucial. Having space for the victims so they're not going to be stood where the perpetrators' families or other witnesses may be. Making a safe space for them. Post-trial support, so crucial, having that built into your planning. Particularly, the cases may not always go the way we hope, but let's hope they do. But post-trial support, that when there's suddenly a vacuum there for the victim, can be a real challenge. And then also making sure that there's a post-trial review. Just because there's a conviction, just because everybody thinks we did well, did we do well? Did we really do well? And it may be everybody saying this was a fantastic case, but until you sit down, particularly with the victim, did you do a good job? And sometimes we miss the self-criticism, constructive criticism that's needed to make sure that we develop and that we're not just turning this into, we did well because there was a conviction. So I think it's really important to understand those elements. And also in the post-trial element is the element of compensation, because the victim can still feel that they're left out. And what I want to say, though, is having dealt with victims from all over the world, each victim and each person has a different idea of what they see as remedy or justice. And I think, as the First Lady from Kentucky said, listening to them as you set the plan out is crucial. And letting them hear what the options are and being honest with them about the options and what the outcomes can be. And I've seen it time and time and time again, where with professional staff from NGOs, from police, from healthcare, from social services, medical support, some of the most traumatized victims can then find the strength to go forward, to find justice, and to actually become part of society. But then, on the other hand, some may not want to face that. So we have to be ready and prepared to deal with both. But as law enforcement and as the state, we still have a duty to tackle and challenge those perpetrators, even if the victim doesn't want to. So we have to have other measures that are available to us. And that may be through money laundering, it may be through other forms of criminality. So thank you very much, Donna, for keeping this going. I'll be in America next week, but I look forward to seeing you hopefully later on in the year when I'm down in Louisiana. So thank you very much, everybody.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Holland, just for sharing those powerful insights and for your continued leadership in the field. I mean, you said so many important things: intelligence sharing, building trust with victims, making them feel comfortable. Oh, and the list goes on. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I know that the information you shared will be very, very helpful to those of us viewing. And so now we will move from investigation to prosecution, where cases face additional complexities, yet accountability is essential. And so with that, it is my honor again to introduce Mr. J. Maxwell Gossman. Mr. Gossman serves as an assistant Commonwealth, as the assistant Commonwealth's attorney with a special victims unit where he prosecutes complex cases involving vulnerable victims. He brings direct frontline experience in navigating the legal, evidentiary, and trauma-related challenges of human trafficking cases. Please join me in welcoming Max Gossman. Max.
Dana, thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today. I also want to share some experiences from a real world case, and I hope that this will illustrate some of the realities that victims face in a context of domestic relationships and how those can evolve into human trafficking situations. On a warm, sunny afternoon in August of 2023, in a quiet neighborhood in Louisville, a woman named Jonna Wilson kicked out her second-story window of her bedroom, and she began to scream. When the police arrived, they found its house had been in total disrepair. There was no running water, no heat, no air conditioning. They tried to enter through the doors, but they found those to have been barricaded shut. They eventually had to use a ladder they found in the backyard to climb to the second floor to reach Jonna's broken window. And when they got inside, they found a scene that looked like a horror movie. Jonna was alone. She had no food, she had no phone, she had no way out. And perhaps most chillingly, she had a heavy chain bolted to the floor and locked around her neck with a padlock.
Y'all bear with me just a second. We're having some technical difficulties. Not letting me share my sound. Hold on just a
You
second.
know what? The sound actually isn't
Okay.
totally essential, so we can just continue the clip and we'll go from there. Thank you. Now, on the surface, Jonna's boyfriend, Moises May, was a kidnapper and obviously a domestic abuser. But the question of why he had done what he did was so much more difficult to answer at first. But as more pieces of the puzzle fell into place, investigators started to better understand the dark reality that Jonna had been trapped in for years. Even if she didn't have the words to describe it yet, Jonna was the victim of human trafficking. But when police arrived at the scene, they didn't find the headquarters of an international crime syndicate. They found the remains of what was once a happy relationship. Jonna and Moises had been together for years. They had a child together. But as police uncovered even more evidence, it became clear that Moises May wasn't just a violent domestic partner. He was a human trafficker who had spent years systematically turning a human being into a revenue stream. He had opened more than 10 Facebook accounts under Jonna's name, communicating with a seemingly endless stream of clients and selling access to her body for cash. When police searched May's cell phone, they found a series of disturbing videos. They showed Jonna from overhead, lying on a dirty mattress, being raped by a series of strangers over the course of several days. And in each one of these videos, her mind was obviously somewhere other than her body. When Jonna eventually testified about these encounters at trial, I asked her if she consented to having sex with these men, and it took me aback because she said she didn't know what the word consent meant. She needed that word explained to her. And after she understood, she testified that every one of these men had had sex with her without her consent. Now, these videos were taken through a hole in the floor, the second floor bedroom where Jonna would later find herself contained. But even before chaining her up, Moises kept Jonna confined to the house and fueled her serious heroin problem. He was simultaneously both her abuser and her only means of support. When a jury finally did get to see the evidence in this case, including evidence of Jonna being exploited on video, they found Moises May guilty of 9 charges, including 5 counts of human trafficking, and he's currently serving a 30-year prison sentence for his crimes. Now, the sad reality for Jonna Wilson was that even after that physical chain was gone from around her neck, that psychological damage that Moises May inflicted on her was a life sentence of its own. It was through the investigation, the preparation, and later the trial of this case that I began to see a pattern emerge that I think can be used to better understand the inner workings of any human trafficking relationship. Now, it's easy to look at a steel chain and a padlock and see that you think that you've seen the entire crime. But for Jonna, the chain was just the final stage of a much, much longer and more painful process. Because before Moises May ever physically restrain Jonna, he built 4 psychological walls around her to ensure that she could never leave. These 4 walls were isolation, dependence, diminished autonomy, and fear. The first wall is isolation. In the popular imagination, isolation looks like a literal locked room, and it often can be. And in the May case, it was a house with barricaded doors and windows. But isolation is a lot more than just a locked room. It's the strategic severing of a human being's connection to the outside world. Traffickers slowly snip away at all these tendons and keep the victim connected with other people. It can begin by saying a victim's friends are a bad influence on her, or that her family doesn't really love her. The trafficker could also move the victim to a city where she doesn't know the streets or the language or a single other person. Isolation can also take the form of depriving the victim of medical care, which is extremely troubling, especially when you consider that medical professionals are among those best positioned to detect signs of human trafficking. And this isolation creates a vacuum in which the trafficker can take complete control. When a victim is isolated, she becomes disoriented to what a normal world looks like, and that gives her trafficker the ability to shape the world around her. Now, once a victim is isolated, kind of skipped ahead several slides. If you're able to go back to your slide 14. Okay, so now once the victim is isolated, the trafficker moves on to that second wall, which is dependence. This is where the trafficker makes himself the victim's only means of survival. In Jana's case specifically, creating dependence was brutal and it was calculated. She had no job and no money of her own, but she did have what Moises knew to be a very serious heroin addiction that he personally fueled. He became her sole provider. She had no money of her own, no job or work experience, and she was made to feel that she had no choice but to stay because she had no other way to survive. And these tactics can be seen across all kinds of human trafficking scenarios. Traffickers leverage whatever gaps exist in a person's life and they exploit them. If a victim's hungry, the trafficker can feed her. If she's undocumented, he can protect her. If she's homeless, he can shelter her. A trafficker doesn't just trap his victims, he makes her feel that without him, she would cease to exist. And then this leads us to the third and perhaps the most insidious wall, which is diminished autonomy. Once a victim is isolated for community and wholly dependent on her trafficker, it's not just her independence at risk, it's her very sense of herself, it's her own identity. And for Jana, this diminished autonomy took a digital form. Moises created Facebook profiles using her name and photos. He spoke to the world as her. He invited men to this house who would later abuse her. He shared sensitive photos that she would never share of herself as advertisements for these quote unquote services. And while Jana was physically present in that house, her identity was being carefully manipulated by her captor. When traffickers withhold passports, access to banking, access to healthcare, they don't just control their victims, they erase them entirely. They turn a human being into little more than a revenue stream, stripping away everything about her that makes her an individual until only the parts the trafficker sees as useful remain. And then finally, overlaying all of this is this fourth wall, which is fear. This is the invisible fence. Fear of an unknown alternative to her suffering can make a trafficking relationship this victim's path of least resistance. Fear of physical violence or even death can tap into a physiological instinct for self-preservation. That's why when you hear the question, why didn't she just leave? That's so troubling, because fear is a physiological state. When a person is in constant state of fight or flight over a period of months or years, their brain chemistry changes. The threat of violence becomes so pervasive that the trafficking relationship, just as horrible as it is, feels like the only way that a victim can protect herself from violence. In Jana's case, she did attempt to leave. And after an argument that led to her being assaulted a few days before she was discovered, she escaped Moises only to be lured back to the house a few days later. And when she came back, Moises chained her to the floor and threatened her life. She had attempted to overcome that fear, but as is so often the case, unfortunately, it resulted in her abuse only being escalated. Go ahead and skip forward one more slide for me. By examining how abusers use these tools against their victims, we see human trafficking is a cancer. It's not a car crash. It doesn't happen in an instant. It grows cell by cell, day by day, until the victim is completely consumed by this relationship. But there is a silver lining. By knowing these tools that the human traffickers use to keep their victims captive, we as a community, as a whole, have a much, much better chance of stopping them. Human trafficking is believed to be among the most underreported crimes in the world. And the sad reality is that only a fraction of the cases that are reported are able to be prosecuted. And the data from my home state of Kentucky bears this out. And one caveat, I'll only be discussing statistics from Kentucky state courts and want to acknowledge that there is significant work and achievements being accomplished on the federal level to fight human trafficking, but I have access to Kentucky state data, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. And with that in mind, in 2024, there were 467 reports of human trafficking made to Kentucky State Social Services. But then if we zoom out, we take a look at the period from 2007, which was the year that Kentucky's human trafficking statute was first enacted, all the way up to 2025, all the way up to last year. From 2007 to 2025, there were only 46 cases indicted in state courts. And of those, 14 of them resulted in a conviction. Think about that. Statewide, we're convicting roughly 3% of what is reported in a single year over the course of almost 2 decades. This isn't because the police or investigators are indifferent or incapable. It's because human traffickers' tools of exploitation are so effective at keeping these victims silent and keeping evidence hidden. And if we want to close this gap, we have to stop waiting for victims to come to us, and we have to learn how to see them where they are. If every trafficking case looked like Jana's with literal chains around her neck and screams for help, our conviction rates in Kentucky wouldn't be so low. But the reason the data shows such an enormous gap between these reports and the criminal charges is that most of the chains traffickers use are invisible to the untrained eye. So how can we start to identify signs of the four walls of exploitation? Some of those signs are physical. One obvious way that we're learning more about as the data continues to build is looking for branding, actual literal tattoos of crowns or bags of money or barcodes, often on a victim's neck or their chest. And these are marks of ownership. They're the physical manifestation of diminished autonomy. And I do want to give a caveat here again, too, because when you see these potential signs of exploitation out in public, out in the world, you need to take in the whole picture. A tattoo or a burner phone in and itself isn't a smoking gun. But when you see, for example, an older male in public controlling every word a young woman says, or a young woman dressed in a way that doesn't match the weather or her age or the situation, you could be looking at a trafficker isolating and controlling victims in real time. So it's not necessarily about knowing a checklist of things to look for when you're out in public, but it's learning a deeper understanding of these methods that human traffickers use to control and isolate and exploit their victims. Sometimes victims do find a way to reach past that fear and to secretly ask for help. And maybe some of you are familiar with this hand sign that has been circulating on the internet for some time, but you put your palm out and you tuck your thumb and you close your fingers over it, trapping your thumb. And it signals to people who know this signal that the person is in trouble. One example was that in 2021 in Laurel County, Kentucky, a motorist saw what turned out to be a 16-year-old girl making this sign in a passing car on I-75. And because that driver knew that sign and knew what to look for, he called the police. Initially, police didn't know that sign. They didn't know what they were looking for, but they took it at face value and they investigated further. And what they found was that this missing girl had been held by this man named James Brick. And it wasn't a taken style kidnapper. He was an acquaintance. She had initially left with him willingly, but later became fearful for her safety. She had been reported missing by her parents in North Carolina a few days earlier. And because a citizen out in the world recognized this sign of fear and knew what to look for, this victim was saved and this predator was ultimately sent to prison. Even if the signs of human trafficking aren't presented to you as explicitly as a hand signal, like I said, keeping the walls of exploitation that human traffickers build around their victims in mind can help you identify the patterns that could eventually help lead to a victim being rescued. You got to trust your gut. If you feel like something's off, it's time to take action. And now I want to talk about when you do recognize these signs, whether it's that hand signal or branding or other more implicit signs of human trafficking, or just a feeling that something isn't quite right about a relationship you're observing. The question is, what do you do with that information? The first and most important thing, and I want to echo what First Lady Bashir said, is that if you see something, say something. The reality is that law enforcement can't be everywhere. In the May case, the Moises May case, the police only arrived because a neighbor refused to ignore Jana's screams and she called 911. When in doubt, make that call. Law enforcement, I promise you, would much rather investigate a report made in good faith that turns out to be nothing than to risk a victim not being helped when they truly are in danger. The second rule is just as important, though, and it's don't be a hero. In the movies, the hero, they discover the person's being trafficked, and they kick down the door and they rescue this victim off to safety. And in reality, confronting a suspected trafficker in public or even questioning a victim could be incredibly dangerous, not just for you, but for this victim that you're trying to help. Traffickers are often hyper vigilant and they can often be armed. And if they feel threatened, they may relocate the victim or somehow retaliate against that victim the moment that you're out of sight, or that they're out of sight from you, so to say. So instead of intervening, we need to provide observations. We need observations, not interventions. We need to train people up to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline or their local law enforcement. And once you make that call, to gather information from a safe distance, things like locations, license plate numbers, physical descriptions, and specific behaviors. And this information is what allows us, investigators, and hopefully eventually prosecutors, to further these investigations and build up a case that will hold up in court. And finally, when you're able, do what you can to help meet the immediate basic needs of people in your community. Because we have to remember that many victims, like Jonna initially, don't even have the words to describe themselves as having been trafficked. They just know that they're hungry, or that they're cold, or that they're scared. And sometimes offering a meal or pointing someone who you may suspect to be a victim of trafficking toward a local women's shelter, it could be that first crack in that wall of dependence on the victim's trafficker. Now, perhaps, in my opinion, the most important thing we can do as advocates for human trafficking victims is to reframe the narrative around how victims themselves find themselves in these horrible situations. And I mentioned earlier about, for many years, popular culture has painted a victim's experience of human trafficking as being like in a car crash, being this singular, unexpected event that instantaneously, in a blink of an eye, can inflict enormous psychological, emotional damage on them. I think I said it once, but like movies like Taken portray these white middle-class women or girls being snatched up by a stranger and sold into slavery. And at the same time, we see posts on social media describing women finding zip ties or other objects on their cars in grocery store parking lots, and that these supposed markings indicate that they're potential targets for human trafficking. And again, in my opinion, by painting human trafficking as something that occurs just seemingly at random to people who are unfamiliar with these captors, I think these portrayals and these sort of memes on the internet make the problem of human trafficking seem just so insurmountable and in certain ways unavoidable. And whether we understand it fully or not, John Wilson's story has so many more similarities to the common experience of human trafficking. And it demonstrates that human trafficking isn't a car crash, it's a cancer. Instead of coming on suddenly, it evolves and it grows slowly out of these dark corners of domestic relationships. And like a cancer, it preys on people with more risk factors than the general public. Things like homelessness or mental health struggles, substance abuse disorders, or a history of physical or sexual abuse. These predispositions make trafficking victims particularly susceptible to falling victim to the tools that are so often used by human traffickers that we've been talking about. And the public's ability to identify those risk factors and the tools that human traffickers use, isolation, dependence, diminished autonomy, fear, that's the first line of defense against this growing epidemic. So the real work to fight human trafficking may end in the courtroom, but it starts in the community. It starts when a neighbor will hear a struggle in the apartment next door and call 911 instead of turning up the TV. Or it could start when a nurse notices a quiet patient with bruises who won't look her in the eye. It starts when a girl waves a hand signal to a passing car whose driver knows what it means. For Jonna Wilson, whose world had shrunk to the length of the chain around her neck, it was a neighbor who called 911 and the police who climbed a ladder to the window to set her free. My challenge to you today is don't look for the sensational. Look for the invisible. Look for the signs of exploitation in those around you. Isolation, dependence, diminished autonomy, and fear. Because if we as a community can dismantle these walls of exploitation, we can stop human traffickers because before they ever have the chance to pick up a chain. So here is my contact information. Please reach out if you have any additional questions or if I can be of service to you. I want to thank Dr. Hunter and former First Lady Edwards and First Lady Bashir and the rest of the Coalition's Advisory Board for inviting me to join you today. Finally, here's the contact information for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for the work that you do in continuing to advocate for the victims of human trafficking.
Wow, that was powerful as well. Another powerful presentation. The psychological walls. We try to explain to professionals and people on the outside of this field all the time, everyday citizens, it doesn't always look like chains or handcuffs. And so you described that so well. And you also mentioned that everybody can play a part. It starts with the community. And so just very, very, very powerful point. So thank you, Mr. Gossman, for that informative presentation. So before you all hop off, we want to give maybe 10 minutes or so to a few questions. So if you're still on and you have any questions, and yes, before you leave, thank you, Sarah Ellen, please complete a survey. But before you go, we want to, if you can stay on and share with us any questions you might have. And I'll let Sarah Ellen, if she wants to come off mute, if we have any questions. Otherwise, I have a few questions.
There have been no questions submitted yet.
Okay.
So Dana, if you have
okay. Okay, thank you. So Max, I'm curious as to how is Mrs. Jonna? How is Jonna? And then I see former First Lady Hutchinson.
Well, Jonna, was a person that before this relationship began and unfortunately after it ended has been dealing with the issue of being unhoused. She has a family member who has custody of that child that I mentioned that her and her abuser had together. I've checked in with her a few times and sadly nobody's heard from her for a little while. So she's in my thoughts, she's in my prayers, but I don't know, and I hope I hope to God she's doing okay.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that, because that speaks to the long road of recovery for victims and survivors. Once they come out of this, even after the rescue, the road to recovery is sometimes very bleak for many. And so, everybody, as Mr. Gossman mentioned, has a part in trying to help, not just for the rescue, but even after, helping to identify resources and services and all of the above, because it is a very traumatic experience. So we will keep her in our thoughts and prayers as well.
Thank you.
Former First Lady Hutchinson, thank you so much for being here. We acknowledge you. Mrs. Hutchinson is also an advisory member, and so thank you so much. And if you want to come off mute, if she's able, and ask her question, or we'll ask it for you. Sarah Ellen, you want to read her question or comment?
Yes, it says victims' rights to participate in reviewing the case. How is that done?
That for me.
I'm not sure if it's for Kevin or Max.
So,
well, okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Max. From the cases that I'm involved in, and I appreciate what Max has said, and all those houses that came up on that slide before were all houses that were just houses in streets, and were like exactly houses not connected in any way other than by telephones and all the rest of it. And one of the things that we do when we do a review is we look at how much contact had there been with different agencies around those addresses, and should that have triggered something sooner? how many people had visited the addresses as police or social services, how many times had the electricity company gone there, how many times had ambulance or fire service or whatever. And so you start to see where was the opportunities missed. But the question about how do you bring the victim in? So what you do is when you get to the end, in the UK and across Europe, every victim has the right to compensation that is funded by the state. And in different countries that may be different amounts. So they will get a lawyer normally after the trial, who will then help them through that process. And that can be quite sizable amounts of money, particularly if there's been sexual abuse or, they've been held against their will or falsely imprisoned. And that could be an isolated case of one person or an organized crime case. And during the process of the looking and reviewing, you will then have a specialist trained officer, or an NGO who has worked with the police, who will then ask the victim what they felt their experience was and ask them a number of questions and give them some time. They'll be assisted with that. And then you will put that into your case review. So it may be that they then start talking about when the police came there 5 months earlier because there was a call to a disturbance and the police never came into the room where they were being held. And I can align this very closely to a case like Max has spoken about there, which is a shocking case. There was one in London, a very similar case, but it was a girl who was chained to the bath, and she was only 11 years of age, Victoria Colombier. And I was involved in the case review of that. But tragically, Victoria died. And yet there had been something like 160 calls to the premises over the 2 years before. So why was it she was missed? Why did people not go in and see her? She was seen by doctors only about 2 months before she died. So all that had to be assessed to say who missed what and why. And that brought in a whole change in policy, a whole change on duties of the local housing, of, landlords, all of that, who then suddenly had a responsibility. But you have to have the victim given the choice to participate in that process. That's all just about learning and development.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on that point. We're trying to look to have in law and enforceable in the law in Arkansas the rights of victims. And they'll put it in writing, but they won't, and I say won't, opposition is primarily from prosecutors that don't want to have to involve the victims in the process of involving the victims, to keep at least the victims informed, in on meetings, in on hearings, court hearings, and all of that. So is this just something that you do in the UK because you know it works better to involve the crime victims? Or do you have a particular guideline? Do you have a law? Do you have an embedded right in the law for the victims of crimes to assert?
Yeah, in the UK, it's a law. There's a code of practice for victims, which is compulsory and has to be followed by law. There's also a code of practice for witnesses, which doesn't have the same compelling requirements on the state. And the code of practice for victims requires certain levels of support to be given to a victim, even when they don't want to go to the police. It's not conditional. So they can get support from the state without having to report or engage with the police. And, it has become part of the norm, the kind of review process, but certainly the way that, the codes of practice for victims, it says these are the things they must be given. Like at the beginning of that video that I showed, that's under a direction of the European Council of Europe directives and other rules and regulations that are required. And so, these rules and regulations can be can be brought in. And I was actually in Arkansas myself recently, a human trafficking event hosted by the Attorney General. And just one of the things to mention is he was looking at the a year before he had been looking at the massage parlors, and they'd been
Mm-hmm.
looking at them individually and looking at one, and then what they did was they gathered all the intelligence and they linked 100 massage parlors by telephones, and then they identified it linked to Chinese organized crime. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not one or the other, it's a multiple set of guidelines, but keeping the victim's needs, as we've heard from Max, right at the core of it. But the victim's needs under the UK code of practice and across Europe is that a victim doesn't stop being a victim once the case comes to an end. So you have to be careful about having that vacuum, because otherwise they go away and nobody's there for them. So having this compensation process, and I've seen victims quite rightly get very large sums of money, particularly if that money can come from the perpetrator, that's even better. But if the
Yes.
perpetrator hasn't got any asset, then it comes from the state.
Yeah. Well, I'd be interested in learning more about that because we need to have some changes here in Arkansas. And I don't know about the other states, but we're one of the few states that doesn't have enforceable victims of crimes rights. We have it in writing. What they are is in the law. But when it comes to abiding by those rights and the process of the prosecutors and the courts handling the cases, and we have policies and a crime victims witness coordinator and that sort of thing in the prosecutor's offices, but it's nothing like I'm understanding what you have there in the United Kingdom. So
Yeah.
if there's, Donna, if there's some way, or Dana, for me to get more information on this from this expert or something, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Kevin.
I can share with you the code of practice. Obviously, it doesn't work perfect. Unfortunately, in the criminal justice world,
Yeah.
things are fast moving. But when it works well, it does work well.
Okay. That would be great to know what those are. That might enlighten what we need to do here in Arkansas.
Dana, did you want to say something really quick before I go to the next question?
Oh, no, I was just going to say this is great, a great exchange of information. So we have time for one more question.
Yes,
ahead.
we have one. It says, I recently found out about the angel shot used as a tool to disclose in establishments. Are there other tools used to disclose without the trafficker becoming aware of this communication? And then the one following that is the blue campaign at airports practiced globally? I'm not sure who wants to take the first one.
I've heard just sort of informally about an angel shot or a specific code word that can be used to indicate to staff at an establishment that something's not right. But I've always kind of heard of it from the domestic violence or dating violence, sexual violence sort of angle. And I've not heard of anything else outside of awareness campaigns in airports, like you mentioned. But the empirical data for how effective those are, I'm not personally aware of. I think one issue just sort of that I've always grappled with things like this is when the victims are aware of it, then the likelihood of a trafficker or a domestic abuser or whoever it may be that's inflicting this trauma is also going to become aware of it at some point. So I don't know. That's something I would be interested in learning and doing a little more research on.
So there's something that's been introduced in hospitality sector, and they display it publicly in bars and hotels, etc., whereby there'll be a password. There's a word that people use, and if you go up to the bar and you say, I'm looking for so and so, and of course, if you're trafficker or the person you see who's tried to spike your drink, or somebody's been following you and you feel unpleasant, then the pub or the licensed premises knows that you're in distress. They will then, someone from the bar will come and just take you to a safe place, and they will call the police. Um, and that's worked very successfully. And one area of the UK, Manchester, has brought in a process of patrols, and it's police and social workers go on patrol together, and they will respond to any calls where there is a child at risk and turn up to them as an emergency. So if there's a call that children have been seen going into a hotel. But what they also do is during that time, because they won't be constantly dealing with risks of hotels, they will have ongoing files. And like, the case that I spoke about, Victoria Columbier, those sort of high risk cases, then they can start routinely calling on those premises and doing, inspections on those children, and then children that aren't turning up to school. So it's linked into the education system as well. That's quite a new system, that one in Manchester. They've also had these, and I think that you've had this in the US for a while, whereby, if hotels sign up to a policy agreement with the police, or they sign up to this program, they will ring immediately when somebody comes into the hotel and they think something's not right. And there has been quite a large number of arrests in those circumstances where the police have been called, 5 minutes after a man way above the age of the child arrives, and then they go to the room and they catch somebody who is, trafficked a child and about to rape them. So, those systems are quite simple in the sense, but implementing them and getting follow through with them is a bit more difficult. And of course, you have to capture data on them, because if you can show they work, and the importance of them, then that shows that they're worth doing, and you'll get more buy-in. Just on the question there about the blue campaign at airports, there is a similar thing across Europe, where helpline numbers are displayed at airport. It's not quite as I've seen it at US airports, and it's very prominent and very well organized. One of the things I did do, though, when I was in the law enforcement, was we have a lot of budget airlines operating across Europe, and they would be used for bringing women from particularly Eastern Europe or Eastern European countries into, whether it's to France, England, Ireland, or wherever. So I managed to get an agreement with them that they would create red flags. So if there were more than, say, 5 tickets booked on the same credit card or the same IP address used, they would then raise that as a flag for women one-way tickets. And then we could look at it. And of course, it wouldn't just be 5, it would be sometimes 50 or 60 tickets booked over a period of a week, one way, all by the same credit card. And that became a very, very great way of implementing prevention within airports, especially, or as people moved on, and it connected us up to some very well structured networks that were operating.
Thank you. And Sarah Ellen,
Yes,
we have one more question.
we do.
We'll respond to it very quickly.
Yes. Are there halfway houses in LA to accommodate victims of human trafficking?
And I can respond to that one if it's okay. So here in Louisiana, we don't necessarily call them halfway houses, but we do have residential programs. I think that was Kevin mentioned Eden Centers. So we have Metanoia Manor, which is a known, really a model that's known nationally and internationally. That's for juvenile victims of human trafficking. And we have Eden Centers for women. And there are also some other private homes across the state that are programs set up for victims of trafficking. So though I would say not necessarily halfway houses, but we do have residential facilities and housing programs for victims. Any other thoughts or anybody wanted to add to that? All right, so with that, we are a little over time, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Mrs. Edwards to give closing remarks. Thank you all so much, and thank you to our speakers and to the audience for engaging in that Q&A. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dana. As we close today, I just want to say thank you again to First Lady Beshear and our team for taking time to share insights of their efforts in Kentucky. I also want to thank each of our speakers, Mr. Gossman, Mr. Highland, for sharing your expertise and your heart. And thank you all for taking time to engage in this important conversation. Human trafficking prevention does not end with this summit. It continues in our communities, our professions, and our everyday awareness. So I encourage you to visit NCPHST website to learn more about our work, access, resources, and stay connected. You will also find the link to a brief survey. Please take a few minutes we dropped it in the chat. We really value your feedback and it helps strengthen our future training. So please take a few minutes to fill out that survey. Together, when we stay informed, connected, and committed, we can protect lives and hold traffickers accountable. So thank you again for being part of this work. God bless. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Don.